Hello, Year 12. Today I'm going to be going through Holy Thursday and the Chimney Sweeper, which, as you will already be familiar with, we've discussed these in Songs of Innocence, but now they're going to be taking a different sort of format in Songs of Experience. So for each poem, the way I'm going to process this is by just jogging your memories of what we have already seen and some of the ideas that Blake's touched on in the poems before considering how the intentions have changed, and then really paying attention to that in the language. The reason why I've chosen to talk about Holy Thursday and the Chimney Sweeper in harmony for this video is because I think they're very similar, because we're looking at the destitution of children and how they have been neglected by the state, whether it be neglected by the church and those benevolent charities put in place, or whether it be by their parents as well, who've turned their backs on them. So Holy Thursday then, to jog your minds, we saw regimented lines of children going down to St. Paul's, crossing the river to show their appreciation and praise of God, and also the benefactors who are funding these charity schools. One of the main acts in this poem is the children's appreciation of that through the form of song, which we hear them singing and trying to form a closer relationship with God. But I was very conscious that we saw the satirical intentions which are in place by Blake in that, and the hypocrisy which is tying into the poem. We discussed the imagery of the wands and how that could be a form of oppression, maybe symbolic of a whipping, because as we know, they have a very regimented and ordered and controlled way of life. So Holy Thursday in Songs of Experience then. We know that we saw that Innocence is open to exploitation before, and we're kind of seeing Blake using the subjugation of the children here to wholly criticise this religious institution. And the singing here takes a very different turn. It's not one of joy and religious praise, but it's one of misery and woe. So I'm going to read through the poem, give a bit of a summary as I go, and we're going to zoom in on some of the things I've highlighted. Is it a holy thing to see in a rich and fruitful land, babes reduced to misery, fed with cold and a serious hand? So the speaker of this poem is already questioning what the definition of holy really means in a world and in a nation or society that is full of money, full of resources. So if that's the case, then why have we got so many children who are reduced to misery and fed by an usurious hand? And the word usurious basically refers to if you were to lend money to someone and you are charged unreasonable rates of interest back. So it could be suggestive of the bards who are, and those in charities who expect excessive returns from the children as they look after them. Is that trembling cry a song? Can it be a song of joy? There's so many children poor, it is a land of poverty. So this is when we would have that attacking tone of the speaker here. Look at the punctuation, the rhetorical questions, the exclamation mark. We are here seeing this interrogation of those charity schools and of the reader who is complicit in how these children are being treated. So this is when the song is taken in a different form, and stressing that whilst this land is one that is supposed to be rich and fruitful, it's actually one of poverty. And what is meant by that is this spiritual poverty. There may be that materialistic riches, but not on a spiritual level. So therefore it's this idea that materialism then has blinded them and made them poor, which is deeply ironic. As we move on, and their sun does never shine, and their fields are bleak and bare. and their ways are filled with thorns. It is eternal winter there. So now we have this movement into a more natural space, and we have references to the sun, to the fields, and to the thorns. So we've got a relationship here between the children and the natural world, and we've seen with Songs of Innocence that this is always seen to be a harmonious sort of relationship, one that is embraced and celebrated. But here you'll notice that we have a sunless field. We've got the crops that are beginning to fail, they're bleak and bare, and references to thorns. So perhaps a link there with Christ and the thorns that was the crown of thorns placed on his head on the cross, to really be emphasizing the suffering that the children are feeling, just like Jesus did. And it is eternal winter there. We've had references to spring, summer, buds and blossoms, but now the winter is never ending, to suggest that they aren't sort of embraced by the warmth and the goodliness of those in society, but actually it's the stark coldness and sort of turning their backs on the children of the society. For wherever the sun does shine and wherever the rain does fall, babe can never be hunger there, nor poverty mind the pool. I think this is the most interesting stanza, because we've had this sort of really demanding and direct tone building up in the poem. Yet it seems at the end that we've got this this question of whether that attack is still taking place. If we think about sun, rain, so water, and food, these are all essential to sustain life. So is it suggesting then that in this world of sheer riches and splendour, money being made, how is it that these children are in the hands of those institutions, are still experiencing the very basic necessities of life? Surely, with all that money in society and those social interventions, this should be improving their conditions beyond basic warmth, water and food. And it just really, really emphasises to us just how basic and exploited that their lives have become. So if I now zoom in on some of the particular words and phrases then, beyond what I've already touched on, we have this emphasis that, as I've mentioned, this spiritual poverty, maybe it's brought about by a lack of imagination and the fact that the world of experience is no longer in conversation with the world of innocence, and there's that jealousy within it. We've spoken about the rhetorical questions and that exclamation mark, but in terms of techniques, I'm interested by this third stanza. So you'll see there, I've highlighted the repetition of and. Now this is what we would call anaphora. And what that means is when the first line of a stanza is repeated, so the word and is repeated. And I think it creates this sort of drumming impact to reveal that relentless misery which is being faced by these children. You know, that this happens and then this and this and this, and it's once again attacking those who run the institutions. And then when we come on to the last stanza, we have this seasonal imagery, and the fact that the natural process of life and earth is not being able to carry out. It's actually become something which is unnatural, which is clouded by materialism, industrialization of this time period, that we've kind of forgotten the fundamental ways in which people live their lives. So a final question then to really consider is whether Blake is overtly attacking maybe the unorganised innocence and the lack of challenge these children are posing, but is that their fault? Or actually whether the speaker is actually, you know, just merely attacking this religious institution, and, you know, should we be coerced into supporting this institution, or do we need to stand up and protest against it? It's kind of seen as maybe our duty to the next generation that we do socially reform these practices. So we move on to the chimney sweeper. So the chimney sweeper we saw at the beginning of the poem in Songs of Innocence. The little boy was weeping, he was crying, but then it was kind of drummed into him that this was the rightful job for him, and if he educates the other children to do their work and their practice, and they're going to get rewarded in heaven. We see a very, very different change in attitude here, and we have the same speaker again who is now commenting about the reality of his life. He's gone through this worldly experience and has become weary from it. He's become beaten down himself. So I'm going to give a reading of the entire poem first. A little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother? Say, they are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath, and smiled among the winter snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death, and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy, and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up heaven of our misery. So we start the poem with the viewpoint that this little chimney sweeper has become something which is unidentifiable. He's been compared to the colour black, and that is in contrast to the snow on the ground. So once again, we're picking up echoes of this seasonal imagery because of this sort of eternal winter which seems to be coming with experience, and how that is synonymous with death, so perhaps foreshadowing an early end to their lives. But also, where we've maybe spoken about black as being one associated with kind of darker connotations, which we picked up in The Little Black Boy, I think that Blake is sort of subverting that here, because to see the two contrary states of the soul or existence as being very black and white, we have the colours here. So perhaps before we would have seen those views of the little black boy as being something that is othered by people in society. We know here that the chimney sweeper is this innocent and vulnerable young child, and actually has been made black, has been made darker from the experience that he's faced. But actually we know that he is inherently good, so once again Blake could be attacking the connotations that we attach to the colour black, and is in protest against that. And the boy again is crying weep, weep, and we see that right at the beginning of the previous poem. But now it's almost, is that the professional cry of the sweeper now, as he's asking for work? Or is it the fact that he has been totally worn down by this job that he's doing, and is only feeling that misery? And it's interesting then that the father and the mother have gone up to church to pray. So this idea that maybe the parents are praying because they think what they've done for their child is the right thing, and actually how they have been indoctrinated, or is it actually something more sinister than that? Is it the fact that the parents are jealous of that childhood innocence, and therefore they have taken away the freedom of their child by forcing them into a world of experience far too early, and an unnatural one as well? So the boy here is kind of beginning to realise the conspiracy of this adult world and how dark and malevolent it really is. And we see this here because he says, well, I was happy, or he thought he was happy upon the heath, and he smiled among the winter's snow. So he was happy in that blissful stage of childhood innocence. But that was taken away very quickly. So once again, picking up this theme of parental jealousy, who have cut his childhood short. And we see now the harsh brutality of life. They clothed me in the clothes of death. And if we think about religious understandings of Adam and Eve, and how when after the fall of man, the first thing they realised about themselves is that they were naked, and felt shameful of that and embarrassed by that. So therefore, the child here is also being metaphorically covered, um, away from his innocence and thrust again into experience. And also the fact that we've got the mentioning of the close of death here could be a metaphor for either his apprenticeship within the chimney sweeping business, which has, thrown him into this adult world. But it could also be a paralleled image with the coffin that we saw in the previous poem, and how, the likelihood of these young boys who are going to be subjugated to an early death. And they were taught to sing the notes of woe. So it's almost like on the surface, it sounds kind, being taught these new skills, being taught the practices and the word of God, but actually it's been something which has become a form of indoctrination, and therefore the young boy has not challenged that. So, because I am happy and dance and sing, they've done me no injury. So the fact that, on the outside he looks physically, well, maybe robust, maybe not, the parents don't think they've done anything wrong, and that's the whole problem here. They are complicit in the unholy unity here that we have of the God, priest and king together, representative of the oppressive forces of the monarchy, of the state, of religion, who are all together collaboratively ruining this young boy's life. So we see the hypocrisy of religion here, and how the parents are colluding with the church and the state to take away that young boy's innocence. So therefore, it's kind of they're attacking here the highest orders and structures of society, because essentially it's those institutions that are profiting from upholding the chimney sweeper's position and in that lowly space. And therefore, we don't have a positive representation of heaven. We have an entirely miserable one. And notice that first person pronoun plural, that everybody in this land of spiritual poverty is not going to go to a positive heaven just because they've been to church. It's really exposing how everyone has been blinded and blinkered by what the actual meaning of morality really is. Now, I just want to touch on the metre in this poem as well, and the form of it too, just to help you with some higher analysis of this poem. Now, if we think about, form being like the layout on the page, both of these poems are significantly shorter than their counterparts. Maybe that is because it is representing how either, the children in the Holy Thursday have been kind of marginalised, and their voices are kind of silenced, and their role in society is silenced in this world of experience. And likewise with the chimney sweeper, we could be saying that the shorter poem size is actually because we have this weakening sense of life and vitality, or actually it could be foreboding the early death to come of these chimney sweeps. Now, metre is in reference to the rhythm, the beats of poetry, and it can become a complex thing, but I'm just going to take it with the chimney sweeper here, and we'll be doing more work on this. But the most important thing is, if you are going to make a comment on metre, is that you make it relevant to your interpretation and understanding of the poem. So I'm now going to introduce you to the idea of iambic tetrameter. Now, you may have heard of iambic pentameter before as being 5 stressed and unstressed syllables over what we would call 5 feet, so 5 separate beats in the line. But iambic tetrameter is the same sort of di-dum, 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 but it's only with 4 feet. So therefore, it kind of creates this overall song-like feel, but it's quite regular, and quite steady, predictable. to perhaps emphasize the solemn tone of this poem and that misery which reverberates throughout each line. However, it doesn't always follow this, and where I'm interested in the irregularities is on the stress of the words weep, weep. Now, this is a double stress. It doesn't follow that sort of pacey dum dum dum. It draws attention to it because it's different. So therefore, once again, taking us to understand those notes of upset felt by the little boy. And I'm also interested by this line here, line 9. And because I'm happy and sing and dance. Now that takes on kind of a more anapestic and dance-like quality to it, to suggest that we do have these two contrary states in the human soul. We can experience life in a positive way, but it's only because of these repressive rules by religion, by the state, by the monarch that is repressing this, and we see that mirrored within the lines. Now, nothing to say as well about the rhyme scheme of this is that each stanza has its separate configuration. So we have in this first one, snow and woe, say pray, so A, B, B. We have heath and death, which is a half rhyme or a parallel rhyme, and snow and woe, so we'd say that that would be C, A, C, A. But what's interesting is where we have snow and woe, which are echoed in their rhyme here as being A in that first stanza. We have snow and woe also representing A, but it's in obviously a different format. It's not the close rhyming couplets that are in the first stanza. Now, because of that, once again, Blake is drawing our attention to these words, snow and woe, to show that we have this perpetual coldness and eternal misery echoed by the sound of woe. So it's when you're able to, as I've done there, really emphasize how that's going to create further meaning to the poem, that's how you're going to get there. So I think to sum this poem up and to compare it with the Songs of Innocence, we're really perhaps seeing how Blake could be suggesting that it's really don't take things by face value. Whilst it may seem that your parents could be doing the right thing for you, well, actually that needs to be second guessed and it needs to be challenged, as we're beginning to see here in Songs of Experience.